Have you ever wondered about the reasons behind the Ukraine and Russia conflict? Ukraine is a multi-ethnic state which provides some context to the ongoing issues being seen in the country. The majority, 77%, of those who live in Ukraine identify as ethnically Ukrainian, while 17% identify as Russian. The reality is tensions have marred relations between Moscow and Kyiv since Ukraine's 2004 Orange Revolution, a bloodless revolt overturning the fraudulent election of Russia-backed Viktor Yanukovych as president. It all started when Yanukovych was elected in 2010, and he decided to renege on a trade pact with the EU under Kremlin pressure. This resulted in mass demonstrations, and he was overthrown in February 2014. Russian President Putin accused the US and EU of instigating a fascist coup and responded with what was, until his full-out invasion of Ukraine, the most significant land grab in post-war Europe. It led to the seizure and annexation of Crimea and Russia, and went on to back pro-Moscow separatist groups in Ukraine that proclaimed two independent republics in the eastern Donbas region along the Russian border. Consequently, a conflict with the Ukrainian military claimed an estimated 14,000 lives before the wider war's eruption. Russian President Putin and his allies accused Ukraine's government of genocide against ethnic Russians and native Russian speakers in Donbas. However, it was wholly rejected by Ukraine as well as the US and EU states. Putin justified the invasion by claiming that the objective of the invasion was the demilitarization of Ukraine. That would make it unable to join NATO, whose expansion into countries that were once within Russia's sphere of influence is believed as an encroachment on its interests. Now, the question is, when and why exactly did Ukraine gain its own independence from Russia? Ukraine became an independent country in 1991 after the fall of the USSR. Independence was gained through a series of referendums with conflicting results. Ukraine formed part of the Soviet Union as one of the constituent republics, then known as the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine's people suffered greatly as the economy was decimated. On March 17, 1991, the Soviet Union held a referendum in all of the republics, asking the people whether they were interested in remaining a part of the Soviet Union or gaining independence. Around 83.5% of the electorate in Ukraine participated in the referendum, with 90% of voters supporting the preservation of the USSR. Historically, those people living in the eastern portion of the country have had greater ties to Russia, while those in the West desire a closer relationship with Europe. Just 9 months after the March referendum, another was held on December 1, 1991. Around 84.2% of the country participated, with 93% voting in favor of Ukrainian independence from the USSR. This was in direct contradiction of what was decided earlier in the year. However, support for this measure was lowest in Crimea, which in 2014 was retaken by Russia. The results of the referendum allowed the then Ukrainian government to continue on their pathway towards independence. Ukraine's government has been on a pendulum since it gained its independence. While as a member of the USSR, Ukraine was one of the most productive and economically vibrant economies. By 1999, production had dropped by 40%. How did Stalin starve and kill millions of Ukrainians? In the 1930s, Soviet leaders under Joseph Stalin engineered a famine that killed millions as they sought to consolidate agricultural power. Feeling threatened by Ukraine's strengthening cultural autonomy, Stalin took measures to destroy the Ukrainian peasantry. In Ukraine, they used additional force as they sought to clamp down on a growing Ukrainian national identity. It began in the chaos of collectivization, when millions of peasants were forced off their land and made to join state farms. The wealthy and successful farmers who opposed collectivization were labeled as kulaks by Soviet propaganda, were declared enemies of the state to be eliminated as a class. The elimination of the kulaks was an integral part of collectivization. Stalin wanted the country with its hugely fertile black soil to be the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. He wanted to feed the important party officials and to export its grain abroad to fund his vast industrialization projects. It was an unmitigated disaster. Farmers were no longer paid for their produce, but worked according to a ration system based on their productivity. Stalin took a series of decisions that deepened the famine in the Ukrainian countryside. Despite the shortages, the state demanded not just grain, but all available food. At the height of the crisis, organized teams of policemen and local party activists, motivated by hunger, fear, and a decade of hateful propaganda, entered peasant households and took away all the edible food. At the same time, a cordon was drawn around the Ukrainian Republic to prevent escape. The result was a catastrophe. At least 5 million people perished of hunger all across the Soviet Union. Among them were nearly 4 million Ukrainians who died not because of neglect or crop failure, but because they had been deliberately deprived of food. These mass repressions, along with manipulation of state-controlled grain purchases and collectivization through the destruction of Ukrainian rural community life, set the stage for total terror. A terror by hunger, the Holodomor. Why is Putin's Russia invading Ukraine? Russia has attacked Ukraine in what could be the start of a war in Europe over Russia's demands for an end to NATO's eastward expansion. While there had been tensions between Russia and Ukraine, a former Soviet republic, for a long time, the situation began getting out of control in early 2021. In January last year, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged U.S. President Joe Biden to let Ukraine join NATO. This angered Russia, which started sending troops near its Ukraine border for training exercises in spring last year and increased it during autumn. By December, the U.S. began hyping up the deployment of Russian troops, and President Biden warned of severe sanctions if Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia has demanded that the West gives a legally binding guarantee that NATO will not hold any military activity in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. In February 2022, Putin again claimed that Ukrainians and Russians are one people. He sees Ukrainians and Russians as brother nations and says that because Russia is the older brother, it should get to be in charge. Most Ukrainians disagree. They have been inspired by the words of their president, Volodymyr Zelensky. He told Putin that Ukrainians want peace, but that if they need to, they will defend their country's independence. Putin invaded, and this time his plan is to take over the entire country. Ukrainians are now fighting the Russian army, trying to defeat what they say is an occupation. In Russia, the people had no say about whether to invade. Many are protesting against it. Many families have both Russian and Ukrainian members. Because of this, a lot of people on both sides of the border do not want to fight a war against each other. The United States and much of Europe are on the side of the Ukrainians. They believe Ukrainians should be able to decide its own future. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Leave a like if you want to see more of these videos. It really helps the channel. But for now, I hope to see you again soon.